All right, leaders. So, how do we cheer the firefighter who rushes in at the last minute, but ignore the fire marshal who kept the crisis from happening in the first place? In leadership, we've built entire cultures that reward urgency and heroics, not sustainability and strategy. And guess what? If you're like me, it's burning us out. Well, in this episode, this is your invitation to lead from a new lens, not just urgency, but to lead from wisdom. Let's get started. Welcome to Back to Transformation Station Leadership Podcast, where we shift from reactive leadership to resilient, values driven impact. I'm your host, Adrienne Benson, and today's conversation, it just might change the way you lead forever. Because today we're exploring a leadership paradox. We say we want peace, stability, and proactive planning, but many times we reward adrenaline, last minute saves, and leaders who are always putting out fires. Stick with me because this episode is actually going to help you to change the lens from which you're leading. Well, today I'm really excited because I have an awesome guest with me. His name is Brad Henderson. Let me tell you a little bit about him. Brad Henderson is a leadership coach and the author of The Consistency Effect: How to Turn Reliable Actions into Remarkable Success. He believes that leadership is too important to be left by chance. He has guided teams through challenging turnarounds, expanded businesses internationally, and helped leaders discover capabilities they didn't even know that they possessed. Listen, Transformation Station is my honor. So, welcome Brad Henderson to our Best in Class series. Brad, welcome to the Transformation Station podcast.
Oh, Adrian, thank you so much for that warm and glowing introduction.
Absolutely. So, listen, I'm absolutely thrilled and excited to dive into our conversation today, right? We're talking about the firefighter, the marshal. Okay, in theory, we know what that's talking about, but I want to start off by asking you this question, right? Why do you think that we tend to celebrate the firefighter, the one who solves emergencies, more than the fire marshal, the one who prevents them?
It's a great question and one that I've pondered for many years. And I think the most important part of it is that there's a psychological and a neurological response that goes on. And somebody who does something consistently day after day, it tends to become monotonous and a little bit routine. Whereas if we find something that's new and interesting, our brains are trained to react to that. And there's endorphins that go off that give us that sense of excitement. So if we are looking at a situation where someone pulled all kinds of hours to be able to turn around a project that was failing, we tend to celebrate that person and that experience because it just seems to be heroic and to be all kinds of energy that was expended to get there. But the reality is, what about the person who, through all of their methodical approach and through their day after day diligence, prevented that forest fire, that fire from starting in the first place? That person doesn't get celebrated because it isn't new, it isn't novel, it isn't exciting. So a part of what I've been trying to do with my book and with my coaching approach is to evangelize this whole concept of consistency and using that as an approach to help get people excited about it rather than the default, which is leaving it to our psychological and neurological experiences.
Okay. So let's talk about your book, right? So in one of the chapters of your book, you detail barriers to consistency, right? Like the prevention paradox, right? Where we celebrate firefighters more than the marshals. So for our listeners, the leaders who are listening, which of these barriers do you see most often, and what's the first step that a leader could take to dismantle these barriers to consistency?
I think probably the most important thing is to understand that there are these natural barriers that are preventing people from being consistent. And that awareness alone is a huge step towards changing that paradigm. And whether there's psychological, the whole concept of new something being new and novel, or neurological, which is the adrenaline that we get from something that's exciting, understanding that those barriers are against you from being consistent is a big part of that journey. Once you understand that those barriers are there, the next aspect is to say, well, how are we going to counteract them? And what I talk about in the book is don't leave it to chance. Don't leave it to just your will to counteract those things. Put in place systems that help you to be consistent. Somebody who has a regular regime of consistency through systems will have successful outcomes as a natural consequence of these systems, rather than just leaving it to willpower or to sheer dint of personality.
I love that. I love that. I want to explore that a little bit more. I'm thinking, there are risks sometimes that organizations or teams take on when they rely too heavily on that reactionary or the crisis management as a leadership model. I mean, we see it all the time. So I totally agree with what you're saying, right? So from your perspective, from what you've seen, what would you say are the risks to organizations or teams when we I have to say when we rely too heavily on crisis management as the leadership model?
Yeah, I think that's an excellent question, Adrian, because one of the things that the crisis management approach causes is burnout in people. Because if everything is left to the last minute, if things are left to decay to the point where heroic activities need to come in, then what we're doing is we're exercising our teams at a level that they don't need to be exercised at. So again, a lot of it comes back to having a very planned and methodological approach to how you're doing these activities, so that there isn't this last minute crises that burns out people and leads them to shut down. If people are under stress all of the time, then what will end up happening is that we'll find that people will shut down that discretionary effort that we want to tap into to get that extraordinary results, just will not be there for all of us to use going forward.
I love that. I have found I've been in organizational leadership for about almost 3 decades now, and I have found, in addition to burnout, well, burnout, I want to say that I think that's like one of the number ones, right? Because when we react all the time, as opposed to thinking and having a system where we respond, reaction causes tension. It causes a sense of desperation. It causes a sense of chaos, right? I have also found that innovation sometimes gets smothered, right? Because we're reacting. We're not taking the time to really see how does this lend itself in a valuable manner for long term. It's always about the short term, the right now. And I have also found that psychological safety disappears as well. So when you talk about these barriers to consistency, I'm like, yes, right on. And here in Best in Class series, we always take a few moments to give our listeners and our viewers a moment of reflection. So to our leaders who are listening and watching right now, I want to invite you to take a few moments right now and to just think about what are the barriers to consistency that you are seeing manifested in your leadership, manifested in your workspace, your organization, that it's a good time to not just know that these barriers are there, but to also, because Brad's going to give us some more things to think about, but also begin to really think about how do we dismantle? How do we dismantle? How do you really dismantle these barriers to consistency? Now, Brad, you shared a deeply personal and moving story about losing your first wife, Lori, to cancer. Share with us, if you don't mind, how did the principles of consistency, sometimes literally just putting one foot in front of the other, how did the principles of consistency help you to navigate that profound loss? And how did it shape your definition of success?
Yeah. Thank you, Adrian. It was the most difficult time in my life because it was totally unexpected, as these things generally are. It was a long-term process, which is regretful. And I had two sons. One was 13, one was 17, whom I had to help through this process as well. And talking about consistency, the consistency was really around focusing on her health and her outcomes, and looking at it from the perspective that of all of the people that have ever survived these things, one of the things that I've noticed is that they've always had hope. So the consistent approach that I took was to always create an environment where she had hope. To give that same hope to my two sons, and at the same time be realistic and pragmatic, so as not to just be artificially or inappropriately unauthentic or not true in terms of what I was trying to say. So always looking for that hope and that opportunity to move forward with her treatments and to move forward with her disease. But when she finally succumbed to those two things, the hardest thing that I ever had to do was to tell my two children that what was a possibility now was a likelihood, and that when she finally passed away, that we were now three people trying to move forward. And as most people that have gone through that realize, very little makes sense at that point in time. But what I felt was that we had to keep moving. We had to keep moving forward, and to consistently just take one step at a time. We knew that over time we would see more clarity as we move forward, and that eventually we would come out of that fog, if you like, in a way that would be our new normal. And so it wasn't something that I thought of deliberately at the time, but in writing the book and reflecting back with sort of today's perspectives and my overarching theme of consistency, it was how I characterized how that came. So thank you for the question.
Absolutely. And thank you for sharing with such transparency for us. I think about this quote when you're talking. It says consistency in leadership, especially during seasons of profound loss, is less about keeping it all together and more about staying grounded when everything else feels uncertain. And as you were talking about hope and how important it was to maintain that hope, and then transfer that hope to your children, right? That was powerful because it was that hope. And they say hope many times stands for have only positive expectations, right? But it was that hope that enabled you to take your feet, keep going, wake up in the morning and say, okay, I'm going to look for the hope in the day, and to ground your children in that. And then I also love the fact that you talked about having to have that difficult conversation. What we were hoping in, it did not manifest the way we wanted it to. And, for the leaders who are listening and watching, that's a part of leadership. A part of leadership is being able to find what it is that helps to keep you, helps to keep the organization, the team grounded, and being willing to have the challenging conversations that should not destroy the foundation, but actually reinforce and enhance the foundation that was set. And I also look at this quote, which says, consistency doesn't deny your pain, it gives your purpose a pulse, even when the heart of it feels broken. Mm. And today we are living and operating and working in a world where there's a lot of pain, there's a lot of chaos. But to the leader that's listening and you're struggling right now in the workspace, you're struggling through your leadership, we want to invite you, Brad and I want to invite you to find what it is that will ground you and give you a sense of consistency as you continue to build stability. Okay. So, Brad, how can leaders start shifting the culture to recognize and reward consistency? Because again, many times we reward that fire marshal, right? But how can we start to, or we reward as the firefighter, the one that's always rushing in? How can we begin to shift the culture and begin to reward consistency, systems thinking, prevention? What would you say to the leader that's saying, okay, this sounds good. Now, how do I start to shift the culture?
I think it really starts with an assessment of your culture and of your systems, because if we think of performance management, if we think of performance reviews, what are the elements in those performance reviews that get rewarded either through recognition or through compensation or both? Because if the actions and activities and outcomes that get rewarded are the Herculean efforts, are the transformations that were the result of a lack of planning, then the incentives are misaligned with the outcomes that you're trying to achieve. And are there rewards in a long-term project which requires a consistent approach day after day, week after week, month after month? What are the interim steps that can be rewarded and celebrated so that momentum and enthusiasm can be kept up during these longer term projects? Because if you think about it, generally consistency is something that pays off over a longer period of time, whereas a Herculean event or the newest initiative, which doesn't necessarily take hold, but is exciting when it's launched, are things that appeal to us from a psychological and neurological perspective because they're new, interesting, and exciting. How do we make those longer term projects new, interesting, and exciting all the way? Because that's how we will reward, that's how we will incentivize, that's how we will create a consistency, and that is what will pay off over the long term.
My goodness gracious. You're really making me stop and think, this it's not even the idea, the principle of consistency is really powerful. And I think that's a huge key right there when we talk about leaders and having that foundation, right? And not operating off of what is emergent. Now, you have a counterintuitive leadership philosophy of taking the blame for failures while giving your team the credit for successes. Why is creating this level of psychological safety so powerful? And Brad, would you mind? Can you share an example of how it unlocked performance at a company like TELUS,
Sure.
please?
It's the story that probably most outlines this particular effect. I was the president of a small system integrating company that we sold to a much larger telecommunications company in Canada called TELUS. And when I went to that organization, I thought I was just going to be there for my earnout and it was going to be a short period of time. But what I was asked to do by the CEO was actually turn around a number of divisions, underperforming divisions, to be an entrepreneur. So an entrepreneurial person inside of a bigger company doing entrepreneurial work, as I call it. And as I got involved in some of these divisions, what I found is that we had an incredible number of well-intentioned people, many of whom knew what to do, but they didn't do what they knew. And I asked them the question, why are we not doing what we know? This makes sense to me. I think this is a great idea. And they say, are you kidding? If this does not go well, this could be a career-limiting move for us. So we're going to stay with the tried and the true and the trivial because it's the safest alternative for us. And I said, well, okay, I'll tell you what. Let's try these things. And if they work out, you guys will get all the credit. I will make sure you guys get all of the credit. And if they don't work out, I will take the blame. And they looked at me like, this is an interesting idea, and I want to believe you, but I really don't. But I said, look, just trust me, let's do a few things. So the first couple of things that we tried did not work out. And true to my word, I said, okay, to the senior leaders, I said, look, this was my call, this is my responsibility. I was at fault here. This is what we learned. This is what we're going to do differently going forward. So they kind of saw that. And then one of the other things we tried, it worked out. And I said, hey, guys, this is the team. They did this. And here's the people that were involved. And they're awesome. And they did a great job. So gradually, they started to believe what I was saying. And they started to see two things. One is a leader who was willing to share success when it was a team effort. It wasn't me doing it. It was them doing it. And someone who was also willing to take responsibility when things didn't go well. So using your point earlier about psychological safety, guess what? They felt that there was the safety to take those risks. They also saw that I didn't get fired. So when I took responsibility for things that didn't go well, I didn't get fired. I may have got reprimanded, or it may have been embarrassing for me in those few minutes. But at the end of the day, I felt that we were moving forward and we were trying things. And rather than just sticking with the tried, the true, and the trivial, we were taking chances and moving forward to try and create a better outcome for the group that we were working in. So I call it, and this is, again, in retrospect, a confidence coach.
Okay.
Somebody who has more confidence in the person than they have in themselves, and it's contagious. And as you help that person to get over that hump and to be confident in their own self, then that person starts to grow and to operate in ways that you could never mandate. And if you want to look at the next level, is then to take that person and say, okay, how can you be a confidence coach for the next level down? And cascade that all the way through the organization. Now think about an organization where you have people taking calculated risks and going above and beyond and doing things they know need to be done because they have the safety to feel that if they do things right, it will work out for them. And if they do things wrong, there will be some consequences, but not devastating consequences.
Confidence coach. Okay, so this is our next point of reflection to those who are listening and watching right now. How can you be a confidence coach as a leader? And this is not like a pie in the sky. This is like for real, right? Brad gave us a real true life example of how, as he operated in this manner, it breathed life into the organization. Those who he was working with brought the team closer together. They were able to execute more. And so I want to invite you to stop and to see how can you operate. And if you say, I'm already operating like a confidence coach, well, great. How can you enhance that? How can you enhance that? So, Brad.
And cascade it. Cascade it.
Yes.
Yeah. Because, I've helped people become great leaders. And then what I've said to them is, okay, what are you doing with those lessons that I've shown you or that you've learned as a part of our relationship together? How are you cascading them down? And how are you cascading them down from there? Because managing people is one level of difficulty. Managing people who manage people is another level of difficulty. Managing people who manage people who manage people is at the highest level of difficulty, because you can't have the one-on-one conversations that you used to have when you were a small company, you now have to articulate your vision and articulate the company's goals through a cascading number of people.
I'm going to invite you to talk a little bit more, because you are hitting the nail on the hammer on the nail right now. Talk to us a little bit more about managing people who manage people who manage people. Because these are leaders many times that don't get an opportunity to have community where they have somebody that's sewing into them. So please, I know this is off the cuff, but talk to the leader who is managing a team that's managing a team that's managing a team.
And it becomes how can you influence a large group of people?
Mm-hmm.
And it's a vexing challenge. It's not simple and it's not straightforward, and there's no one right answer to do it. But ideally, what you really want is you want to infuse people with an excitement and an enthusiasm and a central mission, so that they're acting in a similar fashion to the way that you think that things should happen. And you have to be open enough to be open to seeing if they do it a little bit differently than maybe the way you had thought about it in the first place. And maybe the way that they're doing it a little bit differently is actually better. And how can then you take that and bring it back into your own leadership capabilities, but then push it back out again to other people's leadership capabilities. And then look at it on the basis of watching that like a series of waves rolling through your organization, and how people are starting to get it all the way down the line, and how they're mimicking those behaviors of the leaders in front of them to inspire themselves and be inspired by themselves, but to almost automatically turn it around and say, I've learned this. Who can I teach? How can I share this? I've learned this. How can we spread this through the entire organization? That's how you infect an organization with an enthusiasm and a performance culture that will pay dividends in ways that you could never imagine. And if you're sitting at the top of a large organization, that's the way you'll get the organization working in a way that no one in a command and control approach will ever be able to replicate. That's a competitive advantage that once built will pay dividends for years to come.
Wow. And this is how leaders leave a legacy, by creating systems that have that flow, right? That continue to have that cascading flow. So Brad, as we turn the corner, what advice would you give to somebody, to a leader who excels at the fire marshal role, but feels overlooked compared to more dramatic problem solvers? What advice would you give?
So maybe I'll just make sure I understand your question. So you're talking about somebody who is very effective at being able to react in the moment, and be a firefighter.
Yes.
Compared to somebody who is more systematic. Okay. Yes. Thank you. Again, I think it comes down to a recognition, because we're like on autopilot a lot of the times, and we do things based on the habits that we have developed over time, and anything that you do repeatedly becomes a habit. Well, if you're repeatedly doing forest fire management, then guess what? That becomes your norm, that becomes your habits. If you consciously understand what you're doing and consciously say, I want to move to a different model, it is going to take time and repetition before those new activities lock into place. And so, yes, willpower will help you in that. But if you're relying on willpower alone, it won't sustain itself over a longer period of time. That's why systems and joint accountability, one of the things that I like to do with leadership teams is have weekly meetings where we have joint accountability on the things that we said that we were going to do. It isn't It isn't a to-do list or an action registry. It is more an accountability of peers who are saying, these are the things that we hope to achieve, and only through consistency are we going to get these things achieved. So how do we architect our system? How do we architect our operating model so that we are driving towards consistency simply by what we do every day, as opposed to consciously thinking about, I need to be more consistent. I need to stop, forest fire managing.
My goodness gracious. Final. I'm going to go off screen just for a moment. I'm going to invite you. I'm not even going to ask you a question. I'm just going to invite you to share with our high-driven leaders here in Transformation Station community. What do you want to leave with these leaders today?
I think the thing that drives me is that I think, and you said it earlier, leadership is too important to be left to chance and circumstance. And I think that elevating leadership to a passion, to a conscious approach to trying to help other people become the best version of themselves, and to help train them to train other leaders is the thing that it gives me the most amount of reward in terms of helping others. And seeing them to be successful in that endeavor is what I think is the highest calling of leadership. And so in my book, I hoped to try and show some of the things that I learned along the way, the good, the bad, and the not so good, and look at things from that lens of 2025 as opposed to when I was going through those things at the time, to help people go through that process faster and get to the place that I'm feeling is most important from a leadership perspective.
Thank you so much. I know beyond a shadow of a doubt that there are leaders that are watching and listening that want to engage with you, that want to tap more into the resources, your book or books. So how could someone engage with you, or what's the best way to be able to reach out to you?
Thank you. And so my book is on Amazon. It's called The Consistency Effect. It's on Amazon. I was very fortunate to hit #1 in 3 different categories, so I was very excited about that. My website is on the bottom of the screen there, consistency-edge.com. There you'll find all kinds of different blog posts that I've put. I've tried to take the book and then expand on the concepts there, and using my blog post to do that. You can also follow me on LinkedIn, because I take a lot of the blog posts and try to shorten them down to more bite-sized pieces that people want to digest these days. So those are at least 3 ways that you can connect with me, and thank you so much.
I love that. Fantastic. So Transformation Community, we want to support Brad. I want to invite you to go ahead and get the book, go to Amazon. You see the website here, everything that he has mentioned. And I want to invite you to reach out to him. Let him know that you have seen or heard this podcast. Ask him questions. He is a resource with a wealth of leadership knowledge. Brad, thank you so much for joining us. It's been an honor to have you here as a guest today.
Adrienne, you're such a great interviewer. Thank you so much.
Thank you. All right. Well, there you have it. Another amazing, powerful conversation that we had today. I want to hear from you. And so I want to invite you right now to go ahead and send me a message, DM me, tell me about this podcast. I'll be sure to share it in future podcasts that we have coming up. And don't forget, if this episode sparked a shift in your thinking, share it with a team member or 2, somebody who's ready to lead smarter, not harder. So until next time, stay grounded, stay growing, and remember, transformation isn't loud, it is intentional.